It was supposed to be just another drive. For men like Edward Harrington, nothing was ever supposed to go wrong. He was a billionaire, a man who had built empires from glass and steel, a man who never touched a steering wheel unless it was a polished mahogany of his private yacht. But that night, on the edge of the city, where the skyscrapers gave way to cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, his black Bentley sat dead. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then gave up altogether. Edward cursed under his breath. His chauffeur had gone home early, and for once he had insisted on driving himself. A foolish experiment in independence, he thought. He slammed a hand against the steering wheel and looked around. The street was silent, too silent. That's when he saw her, a little girl, no older than 12, walking with a backpack nearly bigger than her small frame. She had dark skin that gleamed under the dim light, hair tied back into 2 rough braids, and eyes far older than her age, eyes that had seen more than any child should. She stopped when she saw him, tilting her head the way a bird does when it notices something unusual. "You need help, mister?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Edward blinked. A billionaire stuck in a broken car, being offered help by a child. The irony almost made him laugh. No, he said quickly, waving her off. "It's fine. I'll call someone." But when he pulled out his phone, there was no signal. The towers that kept men like him connected to everything, the markets, the news, the world, didn't reach this part of town. The girl took a few steps closer. "It's the alternator," she said simply, peering at the Bentley with an expression of absolute certainty. Edward frowned. "The what?" "The alternator. That's why it won't start. I can fix it." He stared at her. He didn't know whether to laugh or to get back in the car and lock the doors. But there was something in her eyes, steady, confident, unshaken, that made him hesitate. And then, before he could stop her, she dropped her backpack on the pavement and walked right up to the hood of his luxury car. Edward Harrington, a man who had shaken hands with presidents, who owned skyscrapers in 5 countries, found himself speechless as a little girl in worn sneakers and a faded T-shirt reached for his Bentley as though it were just another machine. He told himself it was ridiculous, absurd, impossible. But deep down, he knew he was about to watch something that would change him forever. The girl pushed her braids back, glanced at Edward once more, and then looked at the car as if she'd been fixing Bentleys her whole life. "Pop the hood," she said simply. Edward blinked. He wasn't used to being ordered around, not by executives, not by waiters, and certainly not by a 12-year-old with scraped knees. But something about her tone left no room for argument. He reached for the lever and heard the soft click. The hood rose, heavy and gleaming in the faint glow of the streetlight. The girl pulled a small flashlight out of her backpack. Edward noticed it wasn't new, but the beam was sharp and focused. She balanced it between her teeth, leaned into the engine, and began moving wires with steady fingers. "You shouldn't be doing that," Edward muttered, folding his arms. "This is a very expensive car." The girl mumbled around the flashlight. "A car's a car. Doesn't matter if it's expensive. They all break down the same way." Edward tilted his head. He was starting to realize this wasn't an ordinary child. She reached into the backpack again. This time, Edward saw something strange. Not toys, not school books, not snacks like a normal girl her age would carry. Instead, her bag was full of tools. Wrenches, pliers, electrical tape, even a small voltmeter. Edward frowned. "Why on earth do you—" "Sure," she cut him off, her eyes never leaving the wires. "If you want this to work, don't distract me." For a man who commanded boardrooms and entire companies, Edward Harrington had never been shushed in his life. But he said nothing. He just stood there, watching as her tiny hands moved with precision of a seasoned mechanic. Minutes passed. Edward felt the tension rising in his chest. He told himself it was ridiculous. A little girl couldn't possibly fix a machine like this. But before he could finish the thought, she straightened up, wiped her hands on her shirt, and slammed the hood shut. "Try it," she said calmly. Edward stared at her, then slid into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The Bentley roared to life, smooth and flawless, like it had never broken down at all. For a moment, Edward just sat there, his jaw slack. Then he turned back to the girl. How? How did you? She shrugged. Told you it was the alternator. Loose wire. Easy fix. Easy fix. Edward swallowed hard. This wasn't just luck. This girl knew things. And the question now clawing at the back of his mind was simple. Why? He stepped out of the car, his eyes drifting to the backpack she had set on the pavement. It looked heavy. Heavier than a bag her size should be carrying. Tools, yes, but there was something else. Where are your parents? He asked carefully. The girl stiffened, just for a moment, but Edward noticed. They're not around, she said shortly, grabbing her backpack. He caught a glimpse of something inside as the zipper slipped for a second. Not a tool, not something a child should be carrying. It was metallic, shiny, almost like. The girl yanked the zipper shut before he could see. Her eyes flashed up to his, warning, guarded. Edward Harrington, billionaire, who thought he'd seen everything the world had to offer, realized in that instant he hadn't even scratched the surface. And whatever was inside that backpack was about to unravel everything he thought he knew. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. That little girl, dirty sneakers, tired eyes, but a spark of something I couldn't name. And that backpack, the way she held on to it, the way she froze when I reached toward it, it wasn't normal. I've sat across the table from billionaires, heads of state, people who would kill a man over a signature. And I swear to you, none of them looked at me with the kind of fear that little girl had in her eyes. That fear was hiding something. The next morning, I had my driver circle back to the same spot on the edge of the city. I told myself I just wanted to check if she was safe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about safety. It was about that backpack. And sure enough, there she was, sitting on the curb, hugging it to her chest like a lifeline. I stepped out of the car. She didn't run this time, but her eyes narrowed. Distrust. You again, she said quietly. Yes, I answered. Me again. She glanced at the car, then back at me. Why are you here? I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell a child you're haunted by the weight of something she hasn't even said out loud? Instead, I crouched down to her level, because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Her hands tightened around the straps. Listen, I said, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand. For a long moment, silence. Then she whispered, Nobody wants to understand. That cut deeper than I expected. I looked around, passing cars, people in a rush, the city moving like she didn't even exist. She was right. Nobody wanted to understand. But I did. I asked her name. She hesitated before saying it. Amara. Amara. I repeated, That's beautiful. She didn't smile. Can I buy you something to eat? I asked. Her stomach answered before her lips did. A low growl she tried to cover up. But I heard it. We went to a small diner. Not the kind of place I usually eat, but I knew she'd be more comfortable there than in some luxury restaurant. She ordered cautiously, like she wasn't used to people asking her what she wanted. I let her eat first. Didn't say a word. I just watched. She devoured the food like she hadn't had a full meal in days. And then, slowly, she started talking. She didn't tell me everything, just fragments. Her mother had disappeared. Her father. She didn't want to say much, but from the little I pieced together, he wasn't around. She bounced between shelters, streets, and sometimes worse. But she never let go of that backpack. Even when she put her fork down, her hand rested on it, like it was more important than her own breath. Finally, I asked a question. What's in there, Amara? Her whole body stiffened. The light in her eyes dimmed. She shook her head. You don't want to know. Yes, I said softly. I do. She looked at me for a long time, like she was measuring my soul. And then she whispered, almost trembling, If I tell you, they'll come for me. Who? I asked, but she shook her head again. That was when I realized this wasn't just about a poor child on the streets. This wasn't just about hunger or neglect. This was bigger. Whatever was inside that backpack wasn't just her secret. It was a threat. And sitting in that tiny diner, with plates between us and the city moving outside the window, I felt it. My life was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine, because Amara's backpack was holding something powerful enough to make even me, a billionaire, use control, feel small. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't. Not anymore. Edward Harrington had faced boardrooms that could strip a man of his dignity with a single vote. He had walked into mergers worth billions, his voice steady, his eyes cold. But never, not once, had his hands trembled the way they did now, resting on that little girl's backpack. The cheap nylon felt rough under his palm, scuffed from too many miles walked on shoes too thin. He looked at Angela, at her wide brown eyes that seemed to hold both defiance and fear. She didn't flinch when he stared. She didn't even look away. It was as if she was silently telling him, "If you want to know the truth about me, open it." The billionaire swallowed. He slowly unzipped the bag. Inside were things he never expected. Not drugs, not stolen goods, not some strange trick that he'd been half paranoid about. Instead, it was a collection of survival. A cracked notebook with frayed edges, pages filled with a little girl's careful handwriting. Names, numbers, scribbles, and prayers. On one page, Edward saw, "God, please keep Mama safe at work. Please let the landlord wait. Please make the water come back on." His throat tightened. He turned another page. A drawing of a house, small, crooked, but with a big sun shining above it. And next to the house, two stick figures, one taller, one smaller, holding hands. "Is that you?" Edward asked softly, his voice rough. Angela nodded. "And Mama..." Edward kept digging. A broken flashlight. A small jar with a few coins, nickels and pennies. A folded church pamphlet with words underlined. "Faith even in the valley." And then something that froze him in place. A photograph. It was faded, creased from being carried too long. In it, a young woman, beautiful, tired, proud, stood in a work uniform, holding baby Angela in her arms. Her smile was wide, but her eyes, they carried the same shadows Angela carried now. Edward stared at it. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest ached. "Your mother?" "Yes," Angela whispered. "She works 3 jobs. She says one day it'll be better. But sometimes I don't believe her." Those words sliced through him. He, a man worth billions, who could buy silence, power, loyalty with a stroke of his pen. And here was a little girl who doubted whether hope itself had space for her. But then Edward noticed something else. Tucked deep into a side pocket of the bag, wrapped carefully in a cloth, was a letter. He pulled it out. The paper was yellowed, almost brittle, like it had been carried for years. When he unfolded it, he saw a handwriting that was not Angela's. It was messy, hurried, written in a way that felt almost desperate. Edward read aloud before he could stop himself. "If you are reading this, then the truth has found you. My name is Samuel Brooks. If anything happens to me, tell my daughter I fought for her future. Tell her the world is bigger than this struggle." Edward froze. He looked up sharply. "Who is Samuel Brooks?" Angela's lip trembled. Her little fingers clutched the hem of her jacket. "That's my daddy." Edward blinked. "But where is he now?" Angela looked away. And then, in a whisper that sent shivers crawling down Edward's spine, she said, "They took him." Edward's heart pounded. "Took him? Who? What do you mean?" Angela shook her head furiously, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mama doesn't talk about it. She says it's not safe. But I remember men came one night. They were angry. They said Daddy talked too much. And then he was gone." Edward felt a coldness wash over him. This wasn't just poverty. This wasn't just struggle. This was something deeper, something darker. And for the first time, he realized, this little girl hadn't just been carrying school supplies and prayers in her backpack. She had been carrying a secret that powerful men might have wanted buried. He stared at the letter again, the words burning in his mind. "If you are reading this, then the truth has found you." Edward knew his life had just shifted. He hadn't been looking at a broken car on the side of the road. He had been staring at the opening page of a story that could shake him, maybe even destroy him. Angela looked up at him, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mister, Now that you know, are you going to help me? Or are you going to walk away like everyone else? Her eyes locked on his. And for the first time in decades, Edward Harrington, the man who never bowed, never bent, never cared, didn't have an answer. The night outside was quiet, but Edward felt the storm had only just begun. Edward sat in his office at night, city lights glowing outside the tall glass windows of his penthouse. For years, his view had been nothing but a reminder of power, a sea of skyscrapers that made him feel untouchable. But tonight, the lights felt cold, and the silence pressed against him. On his mahogany desk lay the small pink backpack. He hadn't dared open it until now. Something about the way little Aaliyah clutched it earlier, the way her hands trembled when he took it, told him this was more than a school bag. Slowly, Edward unzipped it. Inside, he expected crayons, candy wrappers, maybe a doll. Instead, he found a notebook, its cover worn, pages filled with a child's careful handwriting. At first, it looked like any kid's journal, but as he flipped through, his throat tightened. Mommy says the lights might go out again. She says not to cry if we get cold. I try to be brave for her. I wish I had new shoes so I could run fast like the other kids. But mine hurt my feet. Today we didn't eat. Mommy said it's okay. Tomorrow will be better. Edward froze, his hand trembling on the page. This wasn't just a notebook. This was a record of survival. Every line was a cry for help disguised in a child's innocent words. But then he turned to a page that made his chest tighten. If something happens to Mommy, I don't want to go to strangers. I'll take care of myself. I promise. Edward leaned back in his leather chair, his heart pounding. This wasn't a game. This wasn't charity. This was life or death. And the next page hit him harder. A small drawing. Not stick figures playing or houses with sunshine. No, Aaliyah had drawn a car. A black luxury car. And beside it, a tall man with silver hair. Him, Edward Harrington. The little girl had sketched him, with an arrow pointing at his figure. And beneath it, in careful block letters, maybe he can help us. His breath caught. She had seen him before. She had hoped, prayed, that he would be the one to notice. And now she had. The weight of those words pressed into him. For the first time in years, Edward felt powerless. Not because of money or business rivals, but because a child had placed her hope in him, and he wasn't sure if he deserved it. But he couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not after seeing this. The next day, Edward's driver pulled up outside the penthouse. But Edward didn't get in. Instead, he carried the backpack under his arm and stepped into back seat. Take me where I found her, Edward ordered. The driver raised an eyebrow. Sir, that neighborhood. Just drive, Edward snapped, his voice low but determined. As the car pulled into the broken streets of the west side, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. From shining glass towers to cracked sidewalks and boarded windows, the city within the city. The place Edward had spent years ignoring, the place where Aaliyah lived. Children played in the dirt near a broken fire hydrant. A group of tired mothers sat on stoops, their eyes following Edward's sleek car with suspicion. He stepped out, instantly out of place. Tailored suit, gold cufflinks, shoes polished, so clean they reflected the gray sky. A young boy shouted, "Yo, who's that?" Another muttered, "Looks like he lost his way." But Edward ignored them. He clutched the backpack tighter and walked until he reached the cracked apartment building where he'd seen Aaliyah. Inside, the hallway smelled of mildew. The walls were stained, the light bulbs dim. But at the end of the hall, there she was, Aaliyah. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Edward knelt, lowering himself to her level, and held out the backpack. "You left this," he said softly. She blinked. Clutching it close the moment he handed it over. But her hands shook. You read it?" Edward hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I did." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "Don't tell nobody. Please." Edward swallowed hard. "Aaliyah, where's your mother?" Her lip quivered. She glanced at the closed door behind her. "She's sick. She tries to hide it, but she can't work no more." Edward stood, staring at that door. He had the power to open it. the power to walk away. But the weight of that little notebook pressed against his chest. This wasn't just charity. This was responsibility. And Edward Harrington, billionaire or not, couldn't run from it anymore. But what was waiting behind that door would shake him even deeper. Because inside, he was about to discover why Aaliyah had clung to him from the start, and the secret her mother had been hiding all along. Edward sat in the back of the chauffeured car, the leather seat cool against his palms, his mind racing. He had insisted on personally taking Angela and her mother, Grace, to their apartment. He told himself it was courtesy, repayment for the kindness of fixing his car. But deep down, he knew it was something more, something he couldn't name. The city blurred by in flashes of neon and streetlights. Edward's eyes kept flicking to the backpack on Angela's lap. She clutched it like a shield. He wanted to ask again what was inside, but every time he opened his mouth, Grace's weary, protective gaze silenced him. Finally, as the car turned into a quieter neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and leaning street lamps, Angela spoke. "Mr. Harrington," she said softly, "do you ever believe people are meant to meet for a reason?" The words disarmed him. Edward, the man who dismissed fate as nonsense, found himself unable to answer right away. He cleared his throat. "Sometimes, maybe. Why do you ask?" Angela pressed her lips together, then unzipped the backpack just a little. Enough for him to glimpse what lay inside. Not books, not toys, but papers. Stacks of them. "Because," Angela whispered, "I think you were meant to see this." Grace gasped. "Angela," she hissed. But the girl kept going, her eyes fixed on Edward with a gravity that didn't belong to a child. Edward leaned closer. What is it?" Angela slowly pulled out a worn folder. Its edges frayed, pages bent. She placed it on Edward's lap. His chest tightened as he opened it. Inside were documents, letters, legal notices, medical bills, eviction threats, and, at the very bottom, a photograph. It was of a man. Younger, thinner, but unmistakable. Edward's jaw went slack. The man in the photo was him. Or at least, someone who looked hauntingly like him. "Where did you get this?" Edward demanded, his voice sharper than intended. Angela didn't flinch. "That's my dad," she said simply. The car seemed to freeze in time. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Edward felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. He stared at the photo again. The resemblance was uncanny. The sharp jawline, the cold blue eyes, the same faint scar along the eyebrow. Grace finally spoke, her voice breaking. "He left when Angela was just a baby. I never told her much about him. And now," she trailed off, her body trembling. Edward felt his hands shaking. This wasn't possible. Or was it? He searched his memory, his past. Deals, women, parties, nights blurred by money and arrogance. Could it be? Angela's voice was steady, almost too steady for her age. I think you're him." The weight of her words pressed on Edward's chest. His mind screamed denial, but his heart remembered. The car stopped outside a small, crumbling apartment building. Grace grabbed Angela's hand, as if to shield her from what she had just said. But Edward couldn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the backpack, at the photo, at the little girl whose eyes burned with a truth he never wanted to face. Angela paused at the door before stepping out. She looked back at him one last time. "You wanted to know what was in my backpack," she whispered. "Now you do." The door closed. The night air rushed in. And Edward Harrington, billionaire, untouchable, cold-hearted, sat alone in the car, feeling smaller than he ever had before. I couldn't shake the sound of her voice. That little girl, Naomi. Even when I tried to sleep that night, the memory of her words wouldn't let me rest. "You're different, mister," she had said, staring up at me with those wide brown eyes, almost too old for her years. Different. That word clawed at me. I was Edward Harrington, a billionaire, a man who built empires, who crushed competitors, who never took the time to bend down and notice the faces and crowd. And yet here was this child, pulling something out of me I didn't know still existed. A conscience. But conscience or not, something didn't add up. Her backpack, the one she clutched like it carried her whole life. I hadn't told her, but when she went to use the restroom at the diner earlier that day, I saw it. The zipper hadn't been pulled shut all the way. And sticking out wasn't just notebooks and pencils. It was something else. A glint of metal. The corner of a folded document. A phone far too advanced for a girl her age. Its screen cracked, but still glowing faintly. I didn't look deeper. Not then. But I knew. That backpack was more than school supplies. And it haunted me. The next morning, I made up my mind. I told my driver to take me downtown. Not to the boardroom. Not to the office towers that bore my name. But to the neighborhood where Naomi lived. The city looked different when you weren't looking from the back seat of a luxury car with tinted windows. I saw the cracked sidewalks. The hollow-eyed men slouched against brick walls. The graffiti scrawled like warnings. I saw kids Naomi's age darting across the street with backpacks just like hers, but lighter, emptier somehow. Her building was worse than I imagined. Rust stained the walls, windows boarded up. My driver frowned, muttering that this wasn't safe. But I waved him off. For the first time in my life, I wanted to step into someone else's world without a shield. I climbed the stairs. Each creak echoed like it didn't want me there. At her door, I paused. Should I knock? Should I even be here? Before I could decide, the door swung open. And there she was, Naomi. Her face lit up in surprise. Mr. Edward? I almost smiled, but then I saw it. Behind her, in the dim apartment, was her mother, a woman in her 30s, worn down, her face carved with years of struggle. She eyed me like I was danger itself. "Who are you?" she demanded. Naomi tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, this is him. The man with the car. He's nice." Her mother didn't soften. If anything, her suspicion deepened. She stepped forward, blocking the doorway, as if she could shield her daughter from me. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I said, raising my hand slightly. "I just wanted to thank her properly. She helped me more than she knows." Her mother studied me, and then, reluctantly, she let me inside. The apartment was small, suffocating almost. The air smelled faintly of dampness and old cooking grease. A single flickering bulb lit the room. Naomi moved quickly, grabbing 2 cracked cups and filling them with tap water, like she was hosting a guest in a palace. I looked around, and that's when I saw it. The backpack, sitting in the corner, half unzipped. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. I needed to know. Naomi's mother caught my gaze. Her voice hardened. "What do you want with my daughter?" That question landed like a slap. For a moment, I was speechless. I stumbled. No boardroom speech could save me here. She reminded me of something I forgot, that there's more to life than money and deals. I don't want anything from her, but I can't ignore what I saw. Her eyes narrowed. "What you saw." I nodded toward the backpack. "There's something in there, isn't there?" Naomi's smile faltered. She froze. Her small hands tightened around the cup. Her mother's face turned to stone. "Leave it alone," she whispered. "Please, for your sake, and hers." Her words sent a chill through me. What could be in that backpack that would make a woman beg a billionaire to stay out of it? I looked at Naomi. She stared back, silent, her eyes heavy with secrets no child should carry. And in that silence, I understood this was bigger than me, bigger than her. But I couldn't walk away now. That night, I replayed every second of that visit in my mind. The fear in her mother's voice. The way Naomi clutched her backpack tighter than ever. And then came the message. It was slipped under my penthouse door. No one should have been able to get past my security. And yet there it was, a folded piece of paper. On it, just 6 words. "Stop asking about the backpack. Or else." My blood ran cold. Someone was watching. Someone knew. Naomi wasn't just a poor little girl in a broken neighborhood. No, she was caught in something far more dangerous. And somehow, I was in it now, too. I thought of walking away. I almost did. But then I remembered her eyes, the weight they carried. And I knew I couldn't leave her to face this alone. So I made a decision. I would find out what was in that backpack, no matter the cost. even if it meant putting everything, my fortune, my reputation, my life, on the line. The night air in the neighborhood was different from the billionaire's gated estates. It was heavy, almost alive, carrying secrets with every passing breeze. Richard Harrington's sleek black sedan sat like a misplaced jewel on a cracked curb. His polished shoes clicked against broken sidewalks as he followed Angela toward her small home. The further they walked, the clearer it became that he didn't belong here. Streetlights flickered, shadows stretched, and eyes peered from cracked blinds. Mothers hushed their children when they saw the strange man in a tailored suit trailing a young black girl. The air was sharp with suspicion. Angela didn't notice. She clutched her backpack tightly, her small frame moving with the rhythm of someone used to navigating danger. Without flinching, Richard spoke, his voice low, careful. "Angela, does anyone know what you carry around in there?" Her hand froze on the strap. She turned her head slightly, enough for him to see her eyes, wide, unreadable. "They don't ask," she whispered. "And I don't tell." Richard slowed his pace. He thought of the documents he glimpsed, the hand-drawn maps, the strange codes scribbled in the margins. A child shouldn't have been carrying them. A child shouldn't have known they even existed. When they reached her house, a small, weather-worn duplex with paint peeling like old scabs, Richard noticed something that made his pulse quicken. The front door was ajar. Angela's breath hitched. Mama always locks it. Richard's instinct screamed. He stepped forward, shielding her with one hand. "Stay behind me," he ordered, though his voice trembled. Inside, the living room was dim, a single lamp buzzing faintly. On the table lay a plate of untouched food. A chair was tipped over, and beside it, a note. Angela rushed forward before he could stop her, snatching the paper. Her lips moved as she read, her voice cracking with fear. "The girl knows too much. We'll be watching. Don't make us come back." Richard felt the weight of it slam into him. Whoever these people were, they weren't bluffing. They had already been here. They knew Angela. They knew her mother. They knew about the backpack. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to the corners, to the shadows that seemed to move on their own. A knot twisted in his stomach. The kind of knot that came when a deal went bad. When powerful men decided your time was up, Angela clutched his arm, tears streaking her face but her voice steady. "You said you'd help me. Then help me now. Because they won't stop. Not until..." Her words trailed off. "Not until what?" Richard demanded. Her silence was louder than any scream. He didn't know why, but he believed her. And for the first time in years, Richard Harrington, billionaire, untouchable in the eyes of the world, felt utterly powerless. Outside, a car engine purred to life. Not his, not a neighbor's. A black SUV, windows tinted, idled across the street. Watching, Angela's grip tightened. "They're already here." I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the rain against my mansion windows felt louder than it should have, like every drop was hammering a question into my head. Who exactly is this little girl? And why do I feel like protecting her is now my responsibility? I poured myself a glass of whiskey, sat in the leather chair by the fire, and stared at her backpack on the table. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my assistants, not the police, not even my most trusted advisor, about what I'd found in there. It wasn't just a crumpled notebook filled with messy handwriting. It wasn't just a broken photograph of her and her late mother. It was the envelope, the one with my name on it, the one that shouldn't exist. I reached for it again. My hand shook, and I don't shake. I built billion-dollar companies with nothing but strategy and cold-blooded decisions. I'd sat across negotiating tables with men who would eat me alive if I blinked. But now, one envelope written in a child's handwriting was breaking me down. When I opened again, I read the first line over and over. "If you are reading this, it means I'm gone. But she must find you." The letter was from her mother, and it was addressed to me. The letter, the words blurred as I read, but the message was clear. Her mother had once worked at one of my companies, years ago. She wasn't high level, just another face in the endless machinery of business. But somehow, she had learned something big. The letter never said what exactly, only that she feared for her life, and that her daughter was a key, she wrote. You may not remember me, but I remembered you. I remember the way you spoke about justice when everyone else only cared about profit. That's why I told her, if something happened to me, find him. He's the only one who can keep you safe. My throat tightened. I couldn't remember the woman's face. I couldn't even remember her name. And yet here I was, the last hope she trusted with her daughter's life. The billionaire who once thought his money could buy or fix anything was now being told that all the money in the world wouldn't erase this responsibility. The morning after, when dawn broke, I walked down to the guest wing of my mansion where she was sleeping. The little girl, curled up in the enormous bed, looked impossibly small. The kind of small that reminds you just how cruel the world is to throw a child into storms she never asked for. She stirred when I entered. Did you read it? She asked softly. Her eyes, she already knew. Yes, I whispered. Her tiny hand clutched the sheets. Then you know why they're watching us. The Watchers. That was the first time she admitted it, and my blood ran cold. Who's watching us? I asked, lower myself to her eye level. The men, she said, her voice barely audible. They've been following me since Mama. She swallowed hard, fighting tears. Since Mama went away. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just about some random encounter on a rainy street. This was orchestrated. Someone wanted her silenced, and now they knew she was with me. The shadow at the gate. Later that day, my head of security rushed into my study. Sir, you need to see this, he said, his normally calm voice tight with unease. He pulled up footage from the gates. There was a man in a black car, parked just far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough to watch. He wasn't moving. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting. I leaned forward. Something about him felt off. He wasn't paparazzi. He was a nosy neighbor. And when the camera zoomed in, I saw it. The cold, calculated patience of someone who wasn't just observing. He was hunting, torn between two worlds. I realized then that I had two options. Call the authorities, hand the girl over, and wash my hand of all this. Or step into a storm I never imagined myself in, and stand against whatever forces were circling her. The billionaire in me, the man who built empires, wanted to choose the first. But the human in me, the man who hadn't felt truly alive in years, couldn't let her down. Not after her mother's words. Not after those eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about profit. I was thinking about survival. Hers. And maybe mine too. The warning. That night, another envelope appeared. Not in her backpack this time. On my doorstep. It had no name. No return address. Inside, only 5 words written in red ink. Stay away, or she dies. I froze. Whoever this was, they knew exactly where we were. They weren't bluffing. The girl stood silently in the doorway, watching me read it. Her voice didn't tremble when she said, "They're here." The ride back to Edward's mansion was unusually quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads glistening under the pale glow of the street lamps. The little girl leaned against the window, her tiny fingers tracing invisible patterns in the condensation. Edward gripped the wheel a little tighter than usual, his mind caught between what he'd seen in that backpack and what it could mean. A photograph. Just a single faded photograph, but one that shouldn't have been there. It was of him, Edward Harrington. 20 years younger, standing at the groundbreaking of a community project he had funded in a poor neighborhood. He hadn't thought about that day in decades. He hadn't thought about those people in decades either. But how had this little girl come to carry a photograph of him? Inside the backpack, he had also glimpsed a small notebook filled with childish handwriting. Pages of drawings, scribbles, and numbers. And tucked between them, receipts from a local grocery store where the girl clearly went often. Ordinary things, but woven into a mystery that was anything but ordinary. As the car slowed at the gates of his mansion, Edward felt the weight of old ghosts pressing down on him. His estate stood in front of them like a fortress. Sprawling lawns, high walls, and lights glowing from a dozen windows. Yet, for the first time in years, the place looked less like home and more like a cage. He parked, stepped out, and opened the door for the girl. She hesitated before stepping onto the gravel, her small frame dwarfed by the towering pillars at the front of the house. "You live here?" she asked softly. "Yes," Edward said, his voice carrying a weariness he hadn't meant to reveal. "This is my home." She studied the house carefully, as if memorizing it. Then, with a surprising calmness, she whispered, "It's bigger than all the houses on my street put together." Edward didn't reply. Instead, he motioned for her to follow him inside. The foyer was bathed in golden light, chandeliers glistening above marble floors. The little girl paused, her eyes wide, but not with wonder, with something else. Something like recognition. "Have you been here before?" Edward asked carefully. She shook her head quickly, maybe too quickly. No. But Edward wasn't convinced. He could see the way her gaze flicked across the paintings, the staircases, the long hallway, as if she knew where they led. He wanted to press her for answers, but something stopped him. Instead, he guided her to the sitting room, where a fire crackled softly in the hearth. "Sit," he said, trying to keep his tone gentle. She obeyed, curling up on the edge of the velvet armchair. The backpack remained clutched tightly in her lap. Edward poured himself a drink, something strong, because he knew this night wasn't finished yet. Then he turned back toward her. "That photograph," he began slowly, "the one in your backpack. Where did you get it?" The girl looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. It was my mama's." Her mama. The words hit Edward with an unexpected force. "Your mother kept a picture of me?" The girl nodded. "She said I should never forget his face." Edward froze. His face. "Why?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Why would she tell you that?" The girl's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just whispered, "Because you're the reason she lost everything." The room fell silent, save for crackling fire. Edward felt the ground tilt beneath him. "I don't understand," he muttered, though deep down, part of him did. Her words dragged him back to the days when he built his empire, cutting corners, making ruthless deals, sweeping aside anyone who stood in his way. Back then, people were numbers, obstacles, faceless masses. He hadn't cared who got hurt. But now, sitting across from him, was flesh and blood, the daughter of someone he had apparently destroyed. The little girl held his gaze for the first time, her voice steady. "My mama told me if I ever found you, I should make you remember us." Edward's chest tightened. He wanted to demand names, dates, proof, but he couldn't, because some part of him knew it was true. He had spent his whole life running from the past. Now it had walked through the rain, carrying a backpack, and sat in his living room. And suddenly, Edward realized this was no coincidence. This girl hadn't just found him. She had been brought here by fate, or maybe by something darker. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the scratch of a reporter's pen, and the faint shuffle of a juror adjusting their seat. Angela sat in the front row, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. Her daughter, little Nia, the girl whose backpack had started the storm, was beside her, feet dangling off the seat, staring wide-eyed at the judge. And me? I sat stiff-backed, sweating under my tailored suit, though the AC blasted cold air. I had been in boardrooms with billion-dollar deals on the line. I had sat across from politicians, lawyers, cartel men, even killers. But nothing compared to the weight of this moment, because this wasn't about numbers. This wasn't about money. This was about truth. The prosecutor rose, her heels clicking against the polished wooden floor. She held up the tattered, pink backpack, the same one that had been strapped to a little girl's shoulders the night I first met her on that lonely road. "This," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "is what the defense tried to hide. Inside this backpack we found letters, receipts, and photographs that prove the defendant's company laundered money through a network of shell charities. And the worst part? They used children like Nia, as pawns in their scheme." The gallery gasped. Flashbulbs from reporters' cameras flickered. I felt my stomach knot, because I knew this was the end game. Across the aisle, Edward Harrington, the billionaire who once looked down his nose at me, at Angela, at Nia, was pale. His arrogance had melted away, leaving only a man cornered by the truth. His lawyers whispered frantically, passing notes, flipping through binders. But it was useless. The evidence was undeniable. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Harrington, do you have anything to say before I deliver sentencing?" For the first time since I'd known him, Edward's voice cracked. I never meant for it to go this far." His eyes darted to Nia. "I swear, I never wanted children involved." But it was too late. The gavel struck like thunder. "Edward Harrington, this court finds you guilty on all counts." Cheers erupted in the courtroom, Angela's tears streaming as she hugged Nia, reporters shouting over one another, guards stepping forward to escort Harrington away. But amid the chaos, Nia tugged my sleeve. I looked down. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, this time with certainty. "Does this mean we're safe now?" she asked softly. And for the first time since the night I'd met her, I smiled without hesitation. "Yes, Nia," I said, my voice steady. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." Angela wept into her daughter's hair, whispering prayers of gratitude. And me? I walked out of that courthouse knowing this wasn't just a case, wasn't just justice served. It was something bigger, because a little black girl with a backpack had changed everything. She had exposed lies, torn down empires, and forced the world to see what it wanted to ignore. And her courage? It had left me speechless. Epilogue. Weeks later, Angela and Nia had moved into a new home, not grand but safe, filled with light and laughter. As for me, I never looked at the world the same again. I had seen wealth, power, corruption, but I had also seen resilience, innocence, and hope in the smallest of places. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't money. It isn't influence. It's a child's truth. And I would carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life.